Hi, good morning, good afternoon, if that's afternoon for you, and welcome. We're going to give it, as always, a minute or two for everybody to join, and then we will start with our webinar. Okay, I still see people joining, so let's give it a couple more seconds. All right, then. So let's start one more time. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we launch Bonard's Global ELT Annual Report, and it's actually its second edition. Let's start with question, and you actually may ask what brings us here. And I do believe that you would actually agree with me that in this era of information, everybody has a questions and is actually searching for answers, especially if we take into account that the ELT sector has faced so many challenges over the past few years. So has the sector recovered? What did drive actually the growth? What shaped the sector? And where is it heading next? And that's something we will try to help you and understand by sharing information. So prepare your questions and thoughts, as there will be a Q&A session following up the presentation of some data and some headline figures and the panel discussion. Please feel free to share your question in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we will actually have time at the end to respond. This session is also being recorded, and the presentation and then the recording will be available for you after the webinar. So let's start. Let us first take a look at the data, and then we will speak with the industry experts and discuss the topics more in depth. There you go. As always, first, let me introduce Bonard. So Bonard is a market research company. We have been doing the research for more than 15 years, and we actively advise associations, governments, individual providers, both on the side of English language, so English language providers or universities. We actually have 4 offices, so 1 in Brazil, 2 in Europe, and then 1 in China that kind of help us to have that global coverage. 91 specialists to date delivered more than 620 projects that help providers use really data-driven strategies to navigate the ever-changing landscape of international education. And I think that has been especially true since the pandemic hit for the sector. So Bonard has been tracking the ELT student mobility for over a decade now. We work with the national associations and we administer their annual reports. And as a result, we do publish an annual benchmark of destinations and over 100 source countries globally. So let's start. Let's have a look at the data, and let's start with 2023. There are always 2 metrics for the ELT sector that we look at, and that is student weeks, and that's the chart on your left, and then student numbers, and that is the chart on your right. These figures represent accumulative numbers of 8 major ELT destinations, and that's namely Canada, US, Ireland, UK, Malta, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. If you look at the data in terms of absolute figures, in 2023, the English language students cumulatively spent almost 8.5 million student weeks, and it actually represented a 34% increase compared to 2022. 2023 also saw a faster growth of the headcount of students, with 40% increase in student numbers between 2022 and 2023. And after 3 years, the sector finally reached that 1 million mark, with 1.1 million English language students traveling. An important metric is also the recovery levels. That is the comparison of the 2023 data to the 2019 levels. So where we kind of sit with the destinations and the source markets to the pre-pandemic levels. If you use this metric, the student weeks recovered to 84% of the 2019 volume, and then the student numbers to 78% of their 2019 volume. So what we see is a gradual recovery, but we also see a slight slowdown in the pace of the recovery. One important note is that the pace and the recovery was uneven across individual destination. And what do we mean by that? If we have a look at the student weeks per individual destination, we will see that in 2023, there were 3 destinations that stood out as top performers. It was Australia, it was Ireland, and it was Malta. Each exceeded their 2019 student volume and captured a larger share of the global market. These 3 destinations benefited from being relatively affordable if you compare it to other destinations, while also offering work rights to English language students. If you combine the affordability, the work rights, and also with the streamlined access to visas, we do believe that these factors help them to recover in 2023. If you look at the chart and the number 1, Australia reaffirmed its position as the leading destinations in terms of weeks. And this was driven predominantly by growth coming from the LATAM region. And the tendency of adult students actually take a longer courses. So the average course duration in Australia was 15.7 weeks, which is well above average. And just to add a context, 94% of all English language students in Australia are adult students. So you see that growth in student weeks. To complement the student weeks, we also have a look at the student numbers across individual destinations. And you see that the ranking here is different than what we saw in student weeks. Despite the fact that UK kind of had a little slower recovery, steady but slower, it still maintained its spot as the most popular ELT destination in the world in terms of student numbers, and actually by a large margin. Interestingly, if you have a look at Australia, USA, Canada, and Ireland, the differences in the number of students studying in the destinations were much more apparent in the past. But if you have a look at 2023, the differences are rather marginal. One additional point to kind of see and what has changed compared to previous years is the fact that in 2023, Ireland actually outperformed Canada in terms of student numbers and moved to the 4th place, and Canada became ranked in the 5th place. To complement, we also have a look on the adult to junior ratio, and that's because we know that the English language proficiency continues to improve, and we do see a steady increase in the number of junior students. You do see more under 18 students traveling to study abroad, and they are starting to travel at a younger age. So if you have a look at the ratio adults to junior across different destinations, Ireland and Malta kind of returned to their standard ratio. It's usually, even before the pandemic, it was almost 50-50 split between adults and junior. However, the UK actually experienced a notable rise in the proportion of juniors, and it reached 61% in 2023 compared to 54% in 2019. Worth mentioning is also the US. So it's a destination that you can see it's dominated by adults, little smaller share than Canada but Australia, but still there is a majority of the students are adults. However, in 2023, we actually saw a decline in adult enrollments, while the number of junior students continued to grow. This kind of suggests the trend that we have seen across sector, across different destinations, and that is that the potential for the sector will continue to lie with junior students. On this slide, you can actually see the top 15 markets globally, and they are measured in student weeks. You can also see the growth rates for individual source markets between 2022 and 2023 above the chart. I guess the first thing that you will note is that for the first time, Colombia actually became the top source market for the ELT sector and actually surpassed Brazil, which held the top position in 2022. We still have China in 4th place, although it used to be ranked as 1st. If you would kind of look for conclusions that you can withdraw from what happened in 2023, it would be that the growth was really driven by countries in LATAM. You have Colombia rising by 72%. You have Mexico rising by 47%. You have also Chile increasing by 23% between 2022 and 2023. If you move regionally and we look at Asia, That was actually mixed performance. We have only Vietnam and Thailand that actually exceeded their 2019 volumes. The rest of the markets have not yet achieved full recovery. Also, if you have a look at the growth, most of the markets in Asia actually recorded a double-digit growth, but Vietnam actually stood out with 144% increase between 2022 and 2023. The development in source markets and the growth that we see, it's always good to put in context of the market recovery. So again, the comparison of the 2023 volume compared to 2019. And what you'll see is that 9 out of the top 15 source markets actually have not reached yet their 100% of pre-pandemic volume. And you also notice that there are significant differences across region. So in LATAM, only Brazil have not reached their pre-pandemic volume. But if you have a look at Colombia, Mexico, and Chile, they all reached their 2019 volumes and actually exceeded them. As I mentioned on previous slide, Asian markets really continue to present kind of a mixed recruitment outlook. So you have Thailand and Vietnam surpassing their 2019 student week volume. And then you have Japan. Japan actually shown a steady recovery. It continues to grow, and it reached 76% of their pre-pandemic levels in 2023. What's interesting about Japan is that you actually see this recovery to be very consistent across all destinations. In contrast, if you have a look at China and South Korea, they remain significantly below their pre-pandemic volumes. For China, actually, the expectations to see any recovery is for 2024. As we know, they weren't fully able to travel until mid-2023, maybe beginning of 2023, depending on destination. And they are long-term planners, so they tend to book very early on. So to actually see how well the China recovered, we will have to look at data on 2024. However, they tend to continue the same pattern as other Asian markets, and that would suggest that China will recover to about 50 to 60% of their pre-pandemic volume in 2024, and then it will continue to grow. In Europe, the growth prospects are a little bit limited. So you see here Italy as the 6th largest market globally, and it achieved a 78% recovery rate in 2023. Then you see Spain and France, they perform better. The recovery rates were at 89 and 94% respectively. And this kind of, if you have a look at it and overall the development after pandemic, it kind of suggests that the student demand for the ELT in some parts of Europe might be kind of nearing the tipping point. But not to dwell too much for 2023, but to also look ahead how the sector is going to look like going forward in 2024. So first and foremost, the major ELT destinations are currently facing difficulties due to visa restrictions and other government regulation. We also already see some declines in the statistics available for the destinations. Canada, in both quarters in Q1 and Q2, saw a decline in student numbers. UK as well in Q1 saw 13% decline in student weeks and then 1% decline in Q2 2024 compared to 2023. And for Australia, we actually saw a 32% drop in new ELICOS student commencements if you compare May 2024 and May 2023. That being said, we will also continue kind of see the demand going also to other destinations such as Ireland, Malta, New Zealand, and South Africa. However, it is important to know that there will be also new emerging destinations like Dubai and Asia Pacific region. So we do see an increase in the intra-regional mobility happening already. Not to be overly negative, there are also opportunities and they do lie in the junior market. So there is a stable growth predicted for the junior market globally for 2024 and beyond. We already saw a strong demand for junior programs, short-term programs, and they are coming from various countries. It's still a dominant domain for EU markets. We do see a demand from China, but also from new markets, for example, from LATAM, that'd be Colombia or Mexico, but also growing demand from Turkey. So what is the outlook for 2024? Sector is unlikely to surpass the 2023 levels, and there is a possible decline, especially due to government policies. It is kind of an expectation that the destination will either kind of remain at the level that they saw in 2023 or see a slight decline compared to 2023 levels. So this will be a few data points that will start us with the discussion. Now I would like to invite our distinguished guests for today to join us. All right, then. So today we will discuss the status of the ELT sector with Jodie Gray. She's the Chief Executive from English UK. Jodie, if you can share a little bit about you.
Hi there, thanks Ivana, and thanks for the insightful presentation. My name is Jodie, I'm the Chief Executive of English UK. English UK is the National Association for British Council accredited English language teaching centres in the UK, and we currently have just over 320 members.
Thank you, Jodie. Then we are joined by Daryl Bish. He's the President of the English USA.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Daryl Bish, President of English USA. English USA is the only trade association in the United States that supports English language programs. We currently have over 220 members.
All right, thank you, Daryl. And we are joined by Ian Eric, CEO of English Australia.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm the CEO of English Australia. I took on this role at the beginning of the year. We are the National Industry Association for English language providers in Australia. We have about 75 members out of around 400 providers that are registered to deliver English language courses. Yeah, it's been a busy year here in Australia.
Thank you, and we'll get to that as well. And last but not least, we are joined by Gonzalo Peralta, Executive Director at Languages Canada.
Hello, Ivana, fellow panelists and dear guests. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been in this role for much longer than I expected. I've been here since 2010, and it's been a very interesting ride. It's very interesting to look at the numbers over the years, and if you look at the blip of COVID, it's just fascinating. We've been looking at the numbers over the last decade, and by we, I mean Canada's English and French language programs. We have 197 member programs across the country, and these teach our official languages, English and French. So happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can go over the questions. I just want to remind you that you are able to ask questions in the Q&A section in the Zoom, and there will be a time at the end of the discussion to kind of go over the questions. So let's start. To begin, I have actually like to ask our panel. We have seen the data for 2023, and now I would kind of like to go to more in depth for the reasons why. So what have been the drivers behind the changes in the student numbers and student weeks? We did saw an increase, although it did slow down compared to 2022. Let's start with Jodie. We saw a steady recovery for English UK. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more what helped the sector? And maybe what also caused that the pace was a little bit slower? One or two factors, maybe?
Sure, thanks, Ivana. Yeah, in 2023, certainly in the first, the first 3 quarters, really, we saw still a continuation of the bounce back after the pandemic. I think still pent-up demand, a big influx of juniors. Obviously, you had juniors weren't able to travel at all during the pandemic. That market completely stopped. And so, we saw in the first 3 quarters of 23, significant growth on the previous year, I think over 50% in terms of numbers, nearly 20% in terms of volume. But then we have seen, as you mentioned, a slowdown in the latter half, in the latter quarter, of the year. And I'm sure we'll go into more depth as to the reasons why, but definitely a feeling that it's been driven by dampening of student demand globally, created by, less than helpful, shall we say, government policies in various markets. And therefore we saw a kind of trend in the fourth quarter where that recovery, that growth was slowing down, and the weaknesses were evident in the data there. But certainly in the first three quarters of the year, I think, as you had mentioned in your presentation, definitely big growth and recovery on the previous year, driven by an influx of juniors into the UK.
Thank you, Jodie, and I'm glad that you mentioned juniors, because I did mention during the presentation there was interesting development in the US. So overall, the US saw a slight increase in the student numbers. However, if you look at the split between adults and juniors, we did see adults dropping between 2022 and 2023, and juniors continue to grow. So Daryl, I'm wondering, do you know what kind of caused the decline? Do you have a sense what caused the decline of adult students, and what actually makes US attractive for the junior students?
I think a decline can be attributed to the high US dollar being one factor. It costs a lot of money to study here. And thankfully, that seems to be improving, and hopefully will continue to do so. In terms of what makes the junior market attractive to us, I think this is a market which has a lot of growth potential for the United States, but it's not equal across all providers. This market is really good for the independent and multi-site programs, but I think university-based or college-based programs will continue to look at this market going forward, and I think it could be something that will help the United States grow in the future.
I remember from the report that visa refusals was one of the areas that also tempered with the growth. Would you kind of elaborate maybe on that, if that was also the cause why adults saw a decline and maybe juniors weren't affected as much?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have students telling us that they are choosing to study in other destinations because of the high rate of visa denials that's seen in the United States. And that's something that we hope will be achieved. We'll find out more come in November when our election happens, what will be going on for our politics. But right now, the message in the United States international education field is the focus on visa denials, and hopefully that will continue to get better.
So touching about a topic that I think had actually been present since the pandemic, and we continue to talk about it, but just from different angles, are the visas and the government's regulations. So Gonzalo, do you think that the announcement of international caps that we actually saw already in 2023 already tempered with the data in 2023, or was there anything else that either positively or negatively actually affected the development in 2023?
The caps, obviously they've had an impact, and the announcement had an impact, but really this is a little bit like the torero with the red cape over there, simply because everything else, it's not so much about the caps, it's 100% about how it was handled, the fact that it was announced. There was a huge gap in knowing how it would be implemented. And this caused so much uncertainty and so much trash, combined with visas to Mexico, combined with increased cost of living and increased cost of financial requirements for visas, increased everything at the same time. So everybody's putting the caps up as the reason, but I think really there are so many other things that play that people are actually beginning to understand. We need to calm down and stop. And we're very happy that the government of Canada, IRCC, for example, is not moving ahead with further changes and policies. Let's take a breath.
So what you're saying, it's one thing that the announcement happened. It's more about how it was handled and the insecurities that it actually caused between students. And I think that was also what Jodie mentioned, that the students kind of halted to travel because they didn't know what's next, how the government's going to implement, how they're going to behave. So that kind of slowed down the growth. I have a question for Ian, but I think he dropped. So let's move and then kind of look. So I do wonder, and this is an open question for all of you. We do see more government regulations, not as much in the US, but definitely in the UK, in Canada, in Australia as well. What do you think might be like the short-term effects of these announcements, and what actually might be a long-term? What might happen that it's going to take a little longer for the sector to recover because maybe of the way how things are announced, or maybe of the lack of information that kind of surrounds the announcements by government? Maybe Jody, would you like to? I know that the government regulation is not directly for ELT sector, but it does have a little bit of a spillover effect.
Absolutely, and I think that what we've seen in the UK with the the weakness is evident in the last quarter of last year, and then what we're predicting in terms of the picture for 24 and going forward to 25 is that sometimes like negative government policies don't even have to happen in your own country, in your own destination, for there to be an impact. And you were saying, it's that creation of uncertainty, the kind of question mark in the mind of the students and agents or parents as they're making decisions, putting decisions off. It doesn't have to be something that's directly impacting the sector. And then we've seen that closer to home in the UK as well. For example, I think towards the end of last year, there was a lot of uncertainty, for example, in the UK around the postgraduate work route. And that doesn't directly impact most English language teaching students and students coming into our sector, into English UK members. But it did have, I think, that effect of creating that uncertainty, as did all the really negative rhetoric coming out of our government for the last decade at least. I was saying, to Gonzalo and I were at an international meeting of the language teaching associations in London just the end of last week, and it was the first time that the UK, as the representative of the UK, we weren't the ones with the most negative government policies impacting us, which was an interesting place to be, given that we had our election earlier in the summer, and some of the it's too early to say exactly how the new government, how the new Labour government here and the policies they're going to bring in, how that's going to affect the market going forward. But certainly it was, it's been positive to hear some of the more welcoming, more kind of open message when it comes to immigration coming out of our new Labour government here. I think our experience over the last decade or more of a Conservative government, and that sort of linking of international education into the anti-immigration argument, is we've seen an enormous impact, which wasn't always immediately obvious. There have been various things that have come in affecting sometimes individual markets, affecting immigration status in certain markets, in certain key markets, affecting work rights, that has then had an impact on student demand from certain markets. And then constant kind of uncertainty around changing immigration rules that have made the operating environment, really quite challenging at times. So I think the impact of government policies is enormous, and unfortunately, as we saw in the UK, like a government gets in and they feel like they need to respond to some anti-immigration type of influence within the wider society, and then international education gets wrapped into that in a way that is really negative and quite damaging for the sector.
Gonzalo, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think Jody is spot on, and I think when we take a real step back and we look at what we do and what we care about, which is to help people connect with each other. That's what language is all about. And so we don't, yes, of course, we do sell English and French courses, but even much more than that, we are providing an experience. We're providing a unique experience for millions of people. They can learn English or French or German at home. Why do they come to Canada, to the US, to Australia, the UK? They want this experience. And when you look at the bigger forces of governments not taking care of their countries and issues coming up for people, poverty, housing, the first people blamed are always the outsiders. and the people that we bring in are the outsiders. So we have very large forces acting on our sector that we need to respond to. And I think it's up to us to really demonstrate to governments and to people in general all the positive aspects, and that this is not taking away housing from anybody. This is not taking away jobs from anybody. This is actually supportive and supporting. So we have a lot of conversations that need to happen around this, and we have a lot of work that we need to do around this. And this is definitely where Canada is going.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead, Daryl.
I'd agree with you, Gonzalo, and I'd also emphasize, I mean, the value our students bring to their communities is so strong. For the cultural, for the basically cross-cultural understanding they bring, the relationships they've helped build, but also the economic impact. In the United States, our English language programs is $1 billion industry, and that is something that we need to promote to other larger international education efforts and to our governments. So we do bring a lot of value, and I think it's okay to talk about the economic value that we also bring to our countries.
All right, then. So building on this, because I think a lot of what you mentioned about the government intervention and the role of English language in the society and for the students, let's do a favorite exercise and the question that we always get. Let's do a little bit of a future gazing. So we do have a limited visibility in terms of data of what's going on, but let's have a look on 2024 and beyond. But let me first ask the same question, also the audience. So we're going to pop up a poll question that should be on your screen shortly, to also see what's the take of audience on and their expectations for 2024. So Ian, let's start with you. We know that 2023 looked very promising for Australia. However, we also know that by Q4 2023, the sector also already saw declines because of the announcement by the government and the aim to regulate what at that point wasn't ELT sector yet included specifically, but then it also had effect on that. So what do you think, how the sector is going to look like in 2024 and then beyond 2024?
Yeah, look, as you said, late 2023, the government did a complete backflip. They went from urgently, desperately trying to grow the sector post-COVID to kickstart the economy, and ignored the peak body's advice on how they did that. They did it recklessly, created problems that they then decided that they would equally recklessly try and fix, again ignoring the voices of the sector. And so in about December, we saw a really significant shift in the way visas were being processed here. That has continued, and they have brought in one change after another over the first 6 months of the year. The key change has really been in how they've processed visas, but they've also brought in some permanent changes, or at least, changes that are intended as ongoing. And the latest that we've just started to see the impacts of was the significant increase in the visa fee. And that has really hurt the English language sector, because the visa fee here is quite disproportionate where students are studying shorter courses. And while in Australia, we're lucky to have English students coming for much longer courses than anywhere else in the world, they're certainly shorter than a degree program, for instance. And so where a student might be taking a 4-year degree, the visa fee gets swallowed up in that, but in a shorter English language program, it certainly doesn't. And we've seen just yesterday, the government released data on visa grants and applications for July, and the visa fee went up from the 1st of July, and we've seen that the the grants has dropped by about 45%, and the applications have dropped a similar proportion. It's quite clear that visa fee increase is going to continue to challenge the sector. But we've also got the government trying to bring in enrollment caps on institutions that are going to cause havoc. So I would suggest that the rest of 2024 will continue as the big first half has, with really poor volumes. It's quite devastating to see after, we finally saw some really strong performance in 2023, and people were starting to get back on their feet after COVID, because it was pretty fierce here with borders closed for 2 years. It was amazing to see so many providers survive it, to be honest. And 22 was half a good year, half it was just getting started. But 2024 has been back at sort of COVID level student numbers, and we expect 2025 will be quite weak, at least initially, unless the government have a rapid change of heart post-election. So we expect to see an election happen at the end of this year, beginning of next year. And a lot of what's going on is very much about domestic politics. And so hopefully, once that election is out of the way, they'll stop using us as a political football.
Thank you, Ian. Daryl, you also have election coming up. So what would be your future kind of outlook for 2024 and then beyond?
Well, even though the elections shouldn't really impact policies that bring in our students, the perceptions that they bring towards your country are real. We have the experience with the previous administration and the U.S. being seen as a less welcoming destination to international students and visitors. So hopefully we'll have good election results come November 1st. And I suspect if I were to answer that poll question, I would say we would see similar growth to what we saw in 2023. Slow, but not as much as we would like. Just like Ian said, we still have a lot of programs that are still struggling, not even anywhere close to where they were in their pre-pandemic numbers. Many programs in the United States have closed in the last 5 years just because they weren't able to continue. So we have hope that we will see growth, specifically maybe in the junior markets, but there is high demand now for short-term English study here in the United States, and a lot of programs are going to need to adapt to that high demand in order to attract those students. Fewer students are staying longer. We used to have students, for example, in my program, I work at the University of Florida, we used to regularly have students stay for 1 year or more, and that is no longer the case now, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's a general trend that we have seen over the years, that the course duration continue to drop. Jody, I know that the Q1 and Q2 for 2024 so far saw slight declines, but we also know that the majority of the business for the UK comes during the summer. So based on, at least anecdotally, as the data are not in yet, where do you see UK in 2024 and beyond?
Thanks, Ivana. Yeah, I think overall we're expecting 24 to be on a par with 2023, but not exceed it. And that in terms of, I guess, trends looking forward, that we are no longer comparing to pre-pandemic. That was an awfully long time ago, and we're not going back there, sadly, in some cases. And that really this is the beginning of a new normal, but that new normal is going to be hard to forecast. And particularly because, we are being buffeted by the winds of external factors that are hard to predict. And it's therefore spotting trends is going to be challenging going forward, I think, which, creates difficulties for those, trying to make plans. But just like sort of connects to that, listening to what Ian was saying about what's going on in Australia, and God, it's depressing, isn't it? Like, I mean, it brings us no joy. I mean, obviously we sat here traditionally, the three big kind of competitor destinations, and It doesn't bring any joy to hear about difficulties going on in other markets, partly because I said earlier, you know, that these things impact us all, partly because we're all international educators and we all want, you know, to open up student mobility, not shut it down, and to hear about, you know, the sector being used as, and international students being used as political footballs is just, it's a depressing narrative that we've become used to in the UK, and hopefully it's moving on here. But just to hear it happening in other countries is a very, very sad thing indeed. And I think that, you know, we would normally, before the pandemic, I think we should speak about things like terms like the zero-sum game, like we were all kind of horse trading for students. Maybe one year, you know, the UK would be a little bit up, and then, you know, one of the other destinations a bit down, and essentially we're just sharing, you know, the pool of international students around between the big major destinations. It kind of feels like that isn't going to be the case going forward. You know, we've got new destinations emerging that are attractive for different reasons to international students. Maybe it's because they have, you know, there's less uncertainty about immigration and accessing those courses. Maybe they're cheaper. Maybe they're just easy to access because they're closer to home. Places like Dubai, places like the Philippines in the Asia Pacific area. You know, there's technology bringing kind of new learning opportunities, and I don't think it's as simple as the stealing of the same students when it comes to, you know, online courses or kind of learning on apps and that type of thing. But it certainly is just impacting the whole dynamic of the sector, impacting decision making in a way that is hard to predict. So yeah, I mean, I think that doesn't really answer your question, does it? Because basically the crystal ball is a bit cloudy. It's not telling us much. And that is challenging and makes us rely even more so going forward on partnerships with Bonnard and the data that's produced, because really, you know, we're all going to have to rely on data in order to make decisions, because we can't rely on past experience anymore.
And to add to the mix, it's the change in the source markets that are actually driving the growth, that are much more flexible in the destination they're going to choose. They are much more price sensitive. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand, that you have a change in the destinations that they opt for, but also change in the source markets and their behavior and the student profile that we see that it's coming from there. Gonzalo, how about Canada?
Well, I do have a crystal ball. I know exactly how this is going to work because I'm following Jody's footsteps. We're going to create a manifesto, and 1 week after, we're going to have a new government that is completely supportive of our sector, right? Because that's the way things roll. Seriously, 2024, I think, will be very similar to 2023 numbers. It's not going to change much. We were on the rise. We were hoping, you know, we were certain that 2022 was going to be a breakthrough year. Instead, it was terrible. 2023 was when finally emerging from the pandemic. It did not happen. 2024, we thought finally this is going to be the year. It's not. We're not going to reach 2019 numbers yet. But two things. Number one, we also have an election coming up by October of next year at the latest. And we know that elections, we've been talking about this, actually impact us. So it's really important for our sector to be in front of the electorate, to be in the conversations, to put our points across as much as possible. And even if we do that perfectly, it absolutely means there's no guarantee of anything. Really, for us, we need to play the long game. And I want to remind everybody that we're in times of incredible uncertainty. So much uncertainty. What's happening in Ukraine? What's happening in the Middle East? What's happening in our own backyards? So the most important thing is to know that we are here to stay. And it's important for all our members, our collective members, and for all the agencies that are working so hard to diversify, to maintain good relations, to understand that today Australia may have an awful government that is decimating the sector with its policies, but that will change in a couple of years, and that those same providers that you were sending students to will still be there, ready to receive your students. Same thing in Canada. We are open for business. We are here, we're proud of what we do, and it's the relationships that maintain that. So I don't see much change in numbers for 2024. I am hoping that for 2025, it's when we will start seeing a steadier growth for Canada.
Ivana, could I just come back on that briefly?
Of course.
Yeah, and thanks to Gonzalo, that timing, as you know, the timing of our manifesto is a total fluke. But like, I think just because, you know, we're in danger of depressing the whole audience. Like, I agree with Gonzalo. Like, I think that there is a lot of depressing news out there at the moment, particularly when it comes to government policies. But when you look back at the history of like the language travel industry, and I was at the 60th anniversary party for one of our members on Sunday, recounting kind of the history of the school. It really is incredible about what the sector and the industry globally has been through in terms of external kind of challenges that have faced us, and the resilience of the language travel industry is quite remarkable. I mean, we're not just talking about COVID here, when the whole thing just shut down for a number of years, and lo and behold, you know, the kind of like the doomsayers who said that was it, you know, everyone was going to go online, it was never going to come back. And that's not true. You know, of course, there have been casualties, but far fewer than I think some of us predicted in the worst years of the pandemic. But the pandemic was just the latest, obviously a very like a very big challenge. But there have been many challenges before. There have been, you know, conflicts, and in big source markets, there have been, you know, volcanoes going off in the wrong part of the world at the wrong time. There's been avian flu, and there's been hand, foot, and mouth, and UK, all sorts of things that have impacted. And government policies, you know, that have changed in markets. And I think that, you know, we have to draw hope and optimism from the fact that the sector globally is incredibly resilient, because in the end, people want to go and learn a language and they want to study abroad. And that demand is just a kind of intrinsic part of the human experience, you know. And I think that while, of course, you know, we have to be, you know, it's good to analyze and look at what's going on right now and to try and forecast as much as we can. And there are some awfully big challenges at the moment. We don't want to depress everybody too much. And there is hope to be drawn from that resilience that we've seen time and time again.
Yeah, thank you, Jodie. That was exactly what I wanted to mention, is that I think what we have learned with the crisis that we have seen over the past few years is that the sector is resilient, and the sector will adapt to a new normal. It might look different, but it will adapt, because the English language learning is an experience that students want to have, and it's very important for them in the future. Let's have a look what audience thinks in terms of where they see if they agree with you that it's going to stay at about the same level as 2023, or if they're a little bit more. Yeah, I think it's fairly, they expect similar numbers, or the second most popular answer was they expect a little bit more students. So that's a positive outlook for the sector. I'm glad. I have now a simple question that sometimes is a very difficult one. So if you can name one market that you think will surprise you in 2024, or positively or negatively, and one trend that you think will be key for 2024. Any volunteers who would like to start? I'm gonna give you a, because that's a difficult question, I know. Gonzalo?
Yes, so we understand that this is in the cone of silence, and that all our competitors in Australia, the US, and the UK won't be listening, right?
Yes.
You know, I really do think it's about the shifts that are being experienced in both the markets and in our destination markets as well. For example, right now, what's happening with Australia, and it means that there may be an opening for the markets where Australia dominates, for others to go in and gain a foothold. The same thing has happened with Canada. Brazil used to be stronger for us than with some of the policies that came in. We've lost some market share in that. So, you know, we give a little bit, you give a little bit, And it's going to be really important to keep an eye on that. I actually see Latin America as a very important market in general. There's a real drive for education. There's a real drive for internationalization. So I think this is very important. And I also think Europe is actually important for us in the future. So there may be surprises there.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, I'd agree with Gonzalo. The South American market is going to stay strong, I believe, for the next year. There are more Brazilians studying in US English language programs than in like undergraduate programs in the United States right now. So I think that market will continue to grow. And I also think for the United States, historically, the English language program students have relied on the F1 visa to come here. I think around 30% of our market is here on the tourist visa or the visa waiver. I think programs could start to look at that group a little more seriously than they have in the past.
Jody, what's your take on the question?
I noticed no one's gone with one market, so I'm gonna go with a few as well. One's too hard to choose, right? Let's go for some regions as well. Keep it nice and broad. No, I mean, I think I agree. Latin America, we're seeing a lot of growth, being like markets there looking quite buoyant. There was some hope before the election here in the UK that there might be some bilateral youth mobility scheme deals concluded with some of the Latin American markets. If that did happen, if that was to happen, that would be a bit of a game changer. Still up in the air as to what's going to happen next there, but we remain hopeful. I think China did not come back as strongly as we hoped it would in the junior segment, and we don't think it has anyway. Data yet to come out for 2024. Not clear yet whether that's because of something more long-term in terms of changes that occurred during the pandemic, or whether it's just recovering, more slowly, and we'll see China bouncing back even more in 25. I think that will be interesting to look at, particularly because they were so important to a lot of our members in the summer, for the summer junior segment. And we're seeing growth from the Gulf and Gulf Cooperation countries, particularly from the self-funded part of the market, and seeing juniors coming from there as well, also self-funded, and let's just see how that develops. I think in terms of like what a trend or something of the facts that's important for us here in the UK. Obviously, we've got our new government. Our new government is making some noise, or there's some hints that the way that they're going to deal with Europe is going to be quite different from the previous government. Europe is a very, very important market for us here in the UK. It has recovered slowly from the pandemic. It's not particularly buoyant right now. Obviously, you have dual impact of pandemic and Brexit all at the same time. So what happens next with the Labour government and how they decide to play the Europe card might have a significant impact for us.
And Ian, before I give you the floor, we have a similar question also as a part of a poll. So let's do that one more time with the audience. They have a very similar question in terms of emerging markets. So let's see if you influence them in any direction and if they agree what you shared so far. And we have 6 to 10 minutes till the end. So I'm going to couple Ian, your question also with the question that we got from audience, because it does tackle on the source markets. So the question remains the same. Where do you kind of see a market that will surprise you positively or negatively, and then the trend? And the question also came like, we have seen significant drops from Colombia, from Brazil, in the visa grant rates. And the question that came was, how do you think that will affect the industry with such a large drops for certain nationalities?
Short answer to that is badly. Unfortunately, Colombia, which saw massive growth for us in 22 and 23, has been absolutely smashed by the Department of Immigration deciding to shift from 20 years of Colombians getting visas about 85 to 95% of the time, to a point now where they're getting them about 35% of the time. So it's pretty devastating. In terms of markets for us, sadly, I don't see any surprises coming because our government isn't allowing any. It's grit your teeth and hope that we come through the other side at this stage. They are really causing a lot of damage to the sector. What I would say is that the one piece of good news, if I can be less pessimistic for a moment, is that we did get a positive situation with the enrollment limits that the government is trying to bring in here, where they have flagged that they will exempt English language programs from those limits. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not that leads to increased numbers of English language students coming. The challenge will be that the caps haven't been what's held us down yet, because they're not in place yet. What's held us down is the government's willingness to grant visas, because they're trying to reduce the number of international students in the country as a result of things that Gonzalo was referring to earlier, with silly policies on housing and saying that international students are taking houses, or there's too many poor quality colleges, so they'll shut down everyone. All this nonsense that's really around domestic politics and two parties vying for who can be the toughest on immigration, despite there not actually being a problem with immigration in Australia. So it's yet to be seen, but there's some hope for the English language sector with that exemption. And in that context, I have some hope, and I also note what Jody mentioned earlier on about the resilience of the sector. We've been through a lot. We've survived it, and I do think we'll survive this government too, and the next one. The state that we're in at the end of that is yet to be seen. And I do think that we are seeing, as again Jody was referring to, a lot of the newer destinations or what were much less common destinations becoming increasingly more popular. And I'm hearing from whether it's agents or investors that they're looking at countries outside of the groups represented here more and more often.
All right, as we are nearing the end, I have one final question, and I'm going to ask you to, it's going to be difficult, but to keep it brief and go on the last round. And I hope it's a question that we kind of help us to end on a positive note. So now, if we think very long term about the sector health, what do you think that the changes must happen for the sector to remain sustainable and to remain competitive? What do you think would be the key kind of changes that has to happen that, we will not only keep the same levels as previous years, but continue to grow? Daryl, would you like to start?
Sure. I think English language programs have always been creative and have always done a good job of answering to the demands of the markets. We're offering programs that students want to take. So as long as we continue to have a pulse on what those demands are, English plus some other sort of training, or those short-term tourist classes, as long as we're able to adapt to those demands, I think there will always be a need for English language programs worldwide.
Can I add to that, Ivana?
Of course.
I agree 100%, and I think we just need to return to our roots and remain really well connected with that, because we are not about immigration. We are not about work. We're connected to those. Those are outcomes. Those are influences and so on. But we are about language education. We're about bringing people together. So if we remain true to that, I think our path will be a lot clearer. I think we get into trouble when we become purely about immigration or purely about business or purely about, academics. We are here to bring people together in an unforgettable experience, and that's what's going to help us. I also want to make a plug for research, Ivana, because one of my members, Kath, asked a question around this. I think that it's really important, in particular for the major destinations, to gather together and not just to share the data as we're doing through our partnership with you, with Bernard, but to take it a step further, to actually bring that data into a more effective conversation that is more global, and to make sure that that data is inclusive. And I noticed that Kath Amico asked a question around how can we make the data more relevant to universities in Canada, for example. It's so important. So one of the ways in which we're going to move forward effectively is through more research.
I like that, Gonzalo, and I 100% agree. Jody?
Thanks, Ivana. Two things, I 100% agree with everything that's been said already, but I think one thing that we could all focus on is what we do really well. It's all around quality. Of course, we have excellent teachers. We provide amazing student experiences. We look after the well-being, welfare of students, but also in a broader sense, focusing on doing better as an industry when it comes to being more inclusive and just creating, being greener, and creating fairer, safer, better, greener, more inclusive, more diverse organisations is going to make us, stronger as an industry globally for the future. And secondly, I think while we provide these amazing experiences, amazing life-changing experiences for students, we're not always that good at communicating to our customers, to our future customers in the places that they're listening. Obviously, social media communications, it's all moved on very quickly. Our industries often are quite fragmented. We've got a lot of smaller players. It's hard to keep up with those developments. But I think we need to be more savvy, more sophisticated in how we're communicating with our customers going forward so that they understand, and they and wider stakeholders in the context of negative government policies really understand what we're doing and the benefits our sectors create.
Ian, go
Last.
ahead.
I have to echo everything that Daryl, Jody, and Gonzalo have said. 100% agree. I would reflect on the fact that I've been in this sector for 25 years. The English language colleges in English Australia's membership provide fantastic programs, great quality services. The recognition of that in surveys of students show really, really high levels of satisfaction. It's a great value proposition. The four speakers here today, whether it's Canada, the UK, the US, or Australia, we're all incredible destinations that people around the world want to travel to and experience, and learning English there is a big part of that. So I think that will continue. One thing I'd add is that it's been quite fascinating here in Australia this last 6 months as the government has tried to tear the sector to shreds. The rest of the country, or a significant chunk of the rest of the country, has actually stood up and said, well, no, we don't agree. We've just had, whether it's the tourism sector or the hospitality sector, the expected ones have stood up quite early on and said, leave the international sector alone. The international students are of incredible value to Australia. But we're now seeing other sectors step up as well. We had news articles yesterday with the tech sector saying, we've got to keep a rich international education sector in Australia, and English language is the starting point for that. So I think it's really interesting to see when the government is attacking the sector, that the rest of the society here is actually stepping up and saying, we really value international students and international education. So I think that might have an interplay there, and we might see those voices elevate over the next few months, and we might see a very different 2025. But I think that we do have a fantastic value proposition, whether you're going to Canada, the UK, the US, Australia, or anywhere else to study English. You know, there's so many fantastic programs and great destinations. I think those things will continue. And I don't think, as much as apps and software and so on are elevating, and AI is incredible, there's nothing that beats a classroom with classmates and a you know, great teacher, and the fun and the experience that you can have there. You know, so I think that will stay a central part of what we do, and it'll stay valued, and we'll still see students. Might not necessarily be 2.6 million weeks again, but it'll certainly be a lot of students coming and having a great time.
And so the sector will continue to be there for students and for the experience, and that's a life-changing experience for
100%.
all of them. On that, let's wrap up. I really want to express my deepest gratitude for you to join me today, and for all the contribution that we heard from you. Hope this session was informative for everybody, and it really showed the potential of the ELT sector, and that it has in 2024 and beyond. Just a quick reminder, again, the recording will be available after the webinar, as well the slides that you've seen here. The full Global ELT Annual Report will be officially released on Thursday, so stay tuned. It will be in your mailbox by then. I also want to share, if you want to stay up to date in what's going on in international education, you can sign up for a market monitor and just go to our website, bonardeducation.com. And that's a wrap for today. So once again, many thanks to Jody, Ian, Gonzalo, and Daryl for joining us today. And thank you also to the audience for excellent questions. For those we haven't gotten throughout the webinar, we will respond to you after the webinar via email. So thank you so much, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you, Ivana. Thank you, Bernard.